Is paranoia a feature of cannabis, or is it a bug in cannabis?
Cannabis. Cannabis.
Cannabis.
Cannabis.
Cannabis.
White House could change marijuana laws across the country.
A very complicated subject, these.
With the legalization, you had many more people using and using more frequently.
I've witnessed cannabis cure cancer. I have seen that with my own 2 eyes. I watched this plant open my father and allow us to create closure where I have never felt agony around his death. I have seen these things happen, and I've also seen the same people that are providing this medicine get their doors kicked in by the DEA. Sometimes when I go into an experience and I have a lot of paranoia pop up, or anxiety, or smallness, and my ego's like, get out of here, go distract yourself, whatever it's gonna tell me to do, but I choose to sit in that. After I sit through it, and yeah, it's usually pretty uncomfortable for the first couple of minutes, sometimes 30 minutes, but if I can keep breathing through that, all of a sudden I reach this bliss state. And so when you get to experience that and know it as your whole life changes. This is the other mistake a lot of people make. They connect with something like cannabis, they feel some semblance of what they would call better, and they think that state came from cannabis. It didn't come from cannabis. Cannabis just allowed you to kind of enter your own computer on safe mode, bypass whatever mental viruses were going on for a little while. But the whole process of integration to me is taking that state and turning it into a personality trait. And so as we start to do that more, we start to realize we can be high all the time on our own supply. And that's the beauty of working with these plants, in my opinion.
What do you think about the current scientific findings and the climate regarding cannabis and neurological, psychological brain health?
What started this whole thing? This whole thing of demonizing cannabis started from something that was extremely racist. I'm going to say something that I don't believe at all, but I'm going to tell you what these guys did. They literally said that there was a new plant coming over the border called marijuana, and Mexican men were raping white women with this plant. And that's how they got it made illegal, essentially overnight. When I first got into cannabis, come home from work and I'd be like, thank God I'm home. Now I can light a joint. And it was kind of like that, thank God. What was I really saying? It was like, thank God I can just forget all that happened now. And that's the definition to me of tuning out. Versus when I actually did the inner work to realize, wait, I'm keeping myself at this job. I'm not a victim here. And why am I keeping myself at this job if I don't like it?
They've often referred to cannabis as the gateway drug, but the way I like to look at it, it's a gatekeeper. They have it completely wrong. And if you're not able to handle cannabis, you should probably stop there. It's a guardian at the gate to say like, hey, take a look at what's going on inside.
When I actually went through and did all that and created my business and everything like that, my life is now so exciting for me and so inspiring. There's no part of it I want to tune out to anymore.
Is paranoia a feature of cannabis, or is it a bug in cannabis?
Great question, Aubrey. I'm so glad we started with this because to me it's a feature, but it's often seen as a bug when it comes to the normal public because we've never been taught how to utilize this plant. We've never been taught anything even about emotional regulation, mindset. I mean, if you think about what we're taught in even high school and even college, it's a bunch of random information that really doesn't teach you how to learn. It teaches you what to learn. And so when people get paranoia from cannabis, what's the typical thing they do? Oh, cannabis gave me paranoia. But really what it is, and again, you can choose to see it that way if you want to, but in my experience, it doesn't really lead anywhere that's useful because now you're just projecting onto a plant. Like the plant didn't hold a gun to your head and tell you, you must connect with me. Your actions put that joint to your mouth, maybe without realizing where your nervous system is at in that space and time. And so for me, I see paranoia as just like any effect I see from cannabis, which is the plant reveals you to yourself. We have these egos that try to protect us from these things that can be harmful to our ego stories. But if we allow ourselves to actually feel those emotions, we can pass through them in as little as 90 seconds. And so for me, paranoia is a great feature of cannabis. I didn't always see it that way. Definitely saw it as a bug for many years. But when I actually started consciously connecting with the plant, I realized that all the plant is showing me is what's inside of me. It's not giving me anything. And I think if people understand that, there's going to be so much more ability to breathe when we connect with cannabis. Because for me, the thing that made me even more paranoid was the thought that this plant did something to me. It's random. I don't know what's happening now. And so if people can understand that cannabis only reveals you to yourself, then it actually mitigates the quote unquote paranoia. And you'll see it as more just nervous system upregulation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They've often referred to cannabis as the gateway drug, but the way I like to look at it, it's a gatekeeper. drug, actually. They have it completely wrong. Like, this isn't something that leads to more drug use. I mean, I'm sure occasionally it has happened that way, as with anything. However, as a gatekeeper, it reveals, as you said, something to you about where you're at. And if you're not able to handle cannabis, you should probably stop there. It's a guardian at the gate to say, like, hey, you're probably not quite ready for ayahuasca or iboga or these other things yet. Take a look at what's going on inside. Like, pass through this gatekeeper, and then before you start to explore the garden of all of these potential plant teachers.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you go back into societies of the past, shamanic societies, things like that. These days we look at plant medicines, they're very popular. A lot of people utilize them, whether it's things like kratom, whether it's things like cannabis, ayahuasca, etc. But like I said before, right, we're not taught a lot of the things that really can benefit one when they connect with plant medicine. Like what we just talked about with paranoia, like if someone understands that, then they connect with the plant, they have the ability to take more ownership over what the plant is showing them. But at the end of the day, these are just tools, right? And the same way that if we give a 3-year-old a hammer, we don't get upset when we realize they punched a hole in the wall. We realize they're 3 years old. That actually is directly on brand with what they should have done at that age. And so I think one of the challenges is that a lot of us have skipped a lot of chapters where we haven't done a lot of the inner work and a lot of the things that actually set you up for success with plant medicine. And then what happens, you can see it in the childlike nature of people saying, the plant did it to me. It's like an adult, right? And I'm not talking about the chronological age you have, but a real adult psychologically and in a soul way would never project that. He would take ownership over the fact that, hey, I made a decision and I have to own up to the responsibility that came along with that decision. So what I really think cannabis is just like you said, it's a great starter plant and it can get you very far. Like, even though I'm saying starter plant, like we talked about in our first episode, everyone's got an edible story that went from an experience to an ordeal pretty quickly. So we know cannabis can go there. But unlike mushrooms and things like that, it's very easy for people to learn how to titrate their own doses with cannabis. That's why I call it the people's plant. With ayahuasca, I wouldn't recommend people just buy some ayahuasca and try to do it in their bedroom,
Hell no.
Yeah, like,
please do not do that.
0 out of 10. That will age like milk. It's not going to be good.
Yeah. This is, I think, one of the things that I started to learn when I started working with cannabis, with Maestro Alejo Lapasanzon, who's my Huachumero and one of my great teachers in cannabis, which he calls Gemaru, is one of the queens. It's a highly revered, plant teacher, and she's a goddess. She's like in the highest level. And I think what we've seen is this kind of commodification of cannabis, like you see with the sacredness of sexuality being commodified in pornography. We have a lot of porn cannabis, and they name it like porn cannabis and they put it in shiny packages, just like you went to the Hustler store. I mean, go into the Hustler store and go into your local dispensary, you're going to see the same colors. You're going to see the same type of tricks, but it's not really what this is about. So Gemaru is about, okay, let me see what's going on inside, and then let me apply the tools that I need for everyday life to this plant. Breathing, chanting or oming, like using your voice, these kind of emotional or psychological regulation techniques that are the rudder to our ship. So it's something that can be a constant guide and teacher. And that's what I've really found with it as I've worked with it over the years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you look at life as 2 parts, forgetting and remembering, forgetting who and what you truly are, forgetting what this dream world is, forgetting all that, or remembering, there's a good hypothesis that if you look at the world today, we're probably in the biggest state of forgetting that we've ever been as a collective, right? You can see this through the divide and conquering, the lack of emotional regulation, the nervous system regulation, all these things. And so at the end of the day, if we don't learn how to remember these things, we're going to get farther and farther away from God, farther and farther into negative polarity or ego-based consciousness. And so I say this example all the time. If I'm working with a client, and this person maybe has never meditated, never done breath work, and their life is just all shades of messed up. And I tell them, hey, why don't you take 30 days off of work, go meditate, and by the 30th day, like, you may really feel better, right? And we know that's accurate. We've been meditators for years. But people are also stuck in this really quick gratification, right? Dopamine hits. And so,
and also passive gratification, right? You know, like one of my other teachers, Alexandre Tanu, he refuses to call these plant teachers, he refuses to call them medicines. And, you know, obviously in the lineages, he respects that they call them medicina, you know, like limpia, limpia, medicina, clean me, medicine, you know, and he respects that. But what he says is that we associate medicine with something like Advil or Tylenol. You take it and you can be completely unconscious. You can forget about it and it will work automatically and your pain will go away. He's like, these are technologies. These are tools. You have to have an active participation process with them and actually harness their benefits. It's not a passive medicine. It's an active technology.
Yeah, I remember when Hamilton Souther brought that up to me, who I met after going on your show, and that guy just became an immediate best friend of mine and such a great guy. And I remember him saying that, like, well, hey, we understand that language is casting spells. And so it's not that plant medicines can't be a medicine, but also like, what do we think about medicine? What have we been trained to think medicine is? Like, oh, I have a headache. I guess that's just an Advil deficiency, right? Yeah. You know, like a crock pot, just take it and forget about it, you know? And so at the end of the day, cannabis can bridge a gap for people. And this is what I've seen working with this plant for over 15 years now, where if I say to someone like, hey, meditation will really help you, they're looking for something that's going to make them feel better immediately because that's what they're used to based off of what medicine is and what they think healthcare is and all these things. So if I can teach them to consciously connect with a plant that allows them to experience what 30 days of meditation would feel like, and I'm able to bring them through a ceremony, and at the end they go, whoa, so wait, you're telling me meditation, breath work, like they'll help me feel like that more? I'm like, yeah. Now they actually know what they're working for. I think it's kind of silly to expect that people in this like shiny object world are going to have the space without really knowing what they're working towards to go subtract from the equation of themselves for 30 days. Because we know addition is easy. You know, if I tell a client, go buy these 18 things, they're like, okay. But if I tell them go sit in silence for an hour, they're like, are you sure I'm not supposed to do anything else? Because subtraction is a lot harder than addition. But until we subtract, we can't actually add back in what we really want to be adding in and what is really good for us. It's kind of like if you have a backpack and it's full of stuff, and then you find something you want to put in that backpack. Well, most of us are just trying to cram it in there, not realizing that when we actually open the backpack, we're like, cinder blocks? Who put those in there, right? Yeah. And so if we have those moments where we can actually subtract, and that's what meditation and all these things can do. And, you know, these plant teachers are a big way to bridge that gap to help us remember very quickly. So we then know where we're supposed to be working towards and where we can actually start to feel the joy, the euphoria, the ecstasy, all the things we're meant to feel, along with all the other emotions of challenge, of sadness, of agony. All of these things are the human experience. And I think plant medicine also can help you realize that, you know, bliss is any emotion felt all the way through, just like Joseph Campbell states, you know. Sometimes when I go into an experience and I have a lot of paranoia pop up or anxiety or smallness, and, you know, my ego's like, get out of here, go distract yourself, whatever it's going to tell me to do. But I choose to sit in that. After I sit through it, and yeah, it's usually pretty uncomfortable for the first couple of minutes, sometimes 30 minutes. But if I can keep breathing through that, all of a sudden I reach this bliss state. And so when you get to experience that and know it as a realization, not just an intellectual knowing, your whole life changes. And that's what I really think these plants are here to do, is help us get back on, like almost course correction in a way, where it's like, oh, I was going over here and I didn't really know why, and maybe I was a little confused, and now I'm aware of what I really want again. And like you said, it's not that the plant's going to do the work for you. You know, this is the other mistake a lot of people make. And they connect with something like cannabis. They feel some semblance of what they would call better, right? Whether it's less stressed, less anxious, happier, whatever it is. And they think that state came from cannabis. It didn't come from cannabis. Cannabis just allowed you to kind of enter your own computer on safe mode, bypass whatever mental viruses were going on for a little while. But the whole process of integration to me is taking that state and turning it into a personality trait. And so as we start to do that more, we start to realize we can be high all the time on our own supply. And that's the beauty of working with these plants, in my opinion.
You know, my teacher, Rebbe Gaffney, he says that your life will be determined by what you do with your emptiness, right? So like what happens when you feel empty? Now, the human body and psyche is amazing at covering over, paving over so many things that are happening so that your executive function can be dialed and you can handle whatever challenges you have. But there's often an emptiness. And in that's why people are so scared of a dark retreat or so scared of sitting in silence, because they're going to have to confront their actual emptiness and sit in it. But if you sit in it long enough, it becomes like this alchemical calcination. Calcination is a burning away of impurities. If you just sit in the emptiness will reveal itself to you. And then you'll be able to remove so much of this static that's wasting all of this energy. I mean, the brain consumes an extraordinary amount of energy for our body. And a lot of it is like when you have too many windows open on your phone. You know, like if you have so many windows open on your phone, what happens to your phone? The battery drains way faster.
Yeah.
So you go hold down, and then you start swiping up like crazy. You're like, Jesus, I opened this fucking 3 months ago. No wonder my phone's still, running out of batteries so quick. But in the emptiness, you can actually go through these programs, think the thoughts all the way through, and clear up space. And then all of a sudden you have more energy. All of a sudden you have more clarity because you're removing the static. So in this way, I really think that cannabis can be a performance enhancer, which goes against what people think of the typical stoner, which is somebody who's actually using it as a way to escape, to avoid, to actually step outside of their normal emptiness, which they feel, and then go into this other world. What is the difference? What's the distinction? How do you know if you're using this to actually step into the emptiness and clear out the static, or if you're using this to bypass and actually cover up something that you need to actually handle with sober, waking consciousness?
Well, first thing I'll say is I'm glad you brought up the tab analogy, because I used to have an Android, and, when I switched to iPhone, because all my friends were like, I'm sick of not being able to voice note you and blah, 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 please get an iPhone.
Yeah, it's super annoying.
Yeah, it's super annoying, right? Yeah. Now that I have an iPhone, I'm like, God, get off Android. But one thing,
Ryan's phone doesn't show up in my text messages on my computer,
What's
so
happening?
I got to go back to my phone, and I'm like, fuck.
It's so silly, right? I think Android and iPhone just need to get
annoying,
together.
Ryan. You're fucking annoying.
Yeah, these Ryans, But one thing Android had that I am so shocked and just confused that iPhone doesn't have is Android had a button when you pulled up on all your tabs, it would hit close all tabs. And iPhone, I got to sit there like a silly goose for like 10 minutes closing all these things and feel like an asshole because I realize how many tabs I've had open, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, what cannabis does for me is sometimes when I don't realize how many tabs I have open. So I'm meditating and I'm closing a couple, but I can't meditate all day. I got stuff going on. So a couple of times a week, I'll connect with cannabis, and all of a sudden it just closes all my tabs at once. And I'm like, whoa, like I forgot again. I forgot just how much lack of space I was existing within. And then to your second point, let's talk about why the stoner archetype is even a thing, right? Let's talk about predictive programming and talk about how cannabis has been utilized in entertainment. Like, what's the most popular rendition of cannabis in pop culture? Cheech and Chong. Now, I'm friends with Chong. I think it's hilarious, but they kind of illustrate this really silly point of view around cannabis. Then you have things like Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle or Pineapple Express. Funny movies, okay? I'll give credit where credit's due. But we don't see any other, program of what cannabis can be in entertainment. And that's where a lot of us get our programming from, right? Television. And so I think part of the reason that cannabis has become like this stoner archetype is because that's what people have been trained subconsciously to think cannabis is. And so for me, the difference is it really comes down to one thing, but I'm going to break it into kind of four, because you could do this one thing and still be unconscious. But the ultimate thing is intention, because intention is not just important with plants or even food or whatever. It's your entire ability to own your creator abilities, right? To be the creator of your reality like we're meant to be. And so for me, intention is the first step. From there, if you have an intention, and like I've said before, I might have shared this in the first episode, the intention doesn't have to be to reach the Nebula Galaxy and hang out with the Galactic Federation. It can be if you want to, but it could simply be, show me, help me, teach me, right? It could simply be, hey, you know what? I'm feeling some stuff going on and my ego's trying to make meaning out of it, but maybe I'm starting to realize that I don't want that part to create the intention. I just want to give a kind of vague one and allow the plant to work in its way. And so that's the first essential step, is having an intention. The second step is having some kind of ceremonial structure. Now, you don't need to wear white robes for this if you don't want to. Okay, it doesn't need to be anything that we think ceremony is. It could simply be you laying down in the room, having an intentional container from which your intention can play out within. So for instance, if you have an intention to figure out what's going on behind the scenes, maybe you've been experiencing some discomfort, you probably don't want to go to a concert to have that intention play out. But let's say a friend comes into town and you haven't seen him for a while and you really want to go dance and have fun, a concert might be a great ceremonial container. Like, I look at ceremony as not this very strict thing like a lot of people in the plant space look at. I look at it as just, are you aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're looking to get from it? And so if you can utilize intention, if you can allow that intention to birth into a ceremonial container, and then after that experience is done, if you can go through some process of integration, whether it's story work or language work, looking at the language you're utilizing when you're writing in your journal after, or when you're speaking into Otter. I'm not a big fan of journaling. I like speaking. And so that's how I do it. And then I take the transcript and I go through it and I start to realize, what spells am I casting here? What's coming out? What was available to me before that wasn't available to me, before, right? Or what's available to me now that wasn't available to me before? And so those three things are essential for me to understand that I'm tuning in with cannabis and not looking to tune out. I think most people can tell just based on this. Before I knew all this, when I first got into cannabis, I'd come home from work and I'd be like, thank God I'm home. Now I can light a joint. And it was kind of like that, thank God. What was I really saying? It was like, thank God I can just forget all that happened now. And that's the definition to me of tuning out. Versus when I actually did the inner work to realize, wait, I'm keeping myself at this job. I'm not a victim here. And why am I keeping myself at this job if I don't like it? When I actually went through and did all that and created my business and everything like that, my life is now so exciting for me and so inspiring. There's no part of it I want to tune out to anymore. And so I think part of it too was also the deconstruction and the subtraction of realizing all the shit that I was trying to escape from, but from this kind of victim mindset of like, oh, the world's against me. Oh, it's this, it's that. When really it was like, no, dude, it's you. It's you doing this. You're casting these spells that are keeping yourself down. And until you start to look at that, nothing's going to change. And so for me, those are the things that really, for me, tell me, okay, am I tuning in versus tuning out?
I want to talk to you about Correct Life. That's our new supplement company. And we just launched a new product called Fuel. Now, this product combines exogenous ketones, which help give you that mental clarity and actual physical energy. And we combined it with electrolytes and also trace minerals, and then a compound that comes from green beans called metabolite, which helps train the body to use your own fat stores as a source of energy. So it's a product that combines many things that we're already probably using. And if we're not, it's great for hydration, great for those pickleball matches, great for long days where you're just rehydrating your body, or even in your morning mineral cocktail. And then we also have, of course, Correct Energy, which focuses on that caffeine metabolite called paraxanthine, which is really like the spirit of caffeine, and then surrounds it with a bunch of natural extracts to enhance the ability to just be your best self. It's the most subtle and powerful energy formula I've ever felt. And really, these products are the core of what Correct is all about. And we'll expand from here, of course. We have Correct Fitness coming down the line soon. But really, this is about how do you have products and information that you can put in your toolkit that will up-level your life every single day so you can be a little better tomorrow than you are today. And that's something that we all need. So if you go to correctlife.com, that's KORRECT life.com, you can get 15% off your first order. Once again, correctlife.com. I think the one thing, a couple things I'll add. One, I totally agree that ceremony is a consciousness. And it's a consciousness that you practice in ceremony, right? But it's a consciousness that can extend all the way out through life. This thing happened. Okay, how is this a ceremony? The most difficult thing, you can look at that and be like, how would I handle this in a ceremony? Yeah. And then that consciousness is saying, okay, this is happening for me, because you learn that. You learn that everything that's happening, whether it's paranoia or whether it's nausea or whatever it is, that's obviously not one of the things that happens with cannabis, but with a lot of other plant medicines, it is. So this is happening for me. Okay, why? What can I learn? What can I harvest from this? So that ceremonial consciousness, learning it in a ceremony, applying it to life, huge lesson. And then the other thing, I think one of the challenges with when you purchase something, you feel like the exchange is already set. Yeah. However, this is not just a commodity. This is a plant technology, and a spirit. I really believe that.
Same.
Like Hamilton Southern, he always asks for the highest medicine spirit of the plant to come be the teacher, because he looks at these plants not as one spirit, but as an aggregation of many, many different spirits. And there's the highest aspect of that. And say thank you.
Yeah.
Just be like, thank you. And say thank you before and say thank you after. Just because you paid for it doesn't mean that the exchange is over. If you're receiving great gifts, if you get an idea for a new business or an idea for a new poem, I mean, so many of my poems in Love to the Seventh Power came when I was actually consciously utilizing cannabis to open up the faculties of creativity.
Yeah.
So when I'm finished, I can just be like, oh, nice poem. But there's got to be a moment to be like, hey, Geminu, Queen Geminu, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I appreciate you. Like, that's another big key component here that I think sometimes gets lost when we're in this kind of transactional consciousness.
Definitely. I mean, it's funny. I use this analogy a lot of like why intention matters. And the analogy I use is that imagine you're a kid and you're sick and all your mom wants to do is take care of you. So she comes in and she's like, honey, what can I get you? And you just stare at her and you don't say anything. She's probably going to be like, all right, you're a little weird, but she's going to go try to do whatever she thinks you need. And she might bring you tomato soup and you're like, I didn't really want that. But she's like, I didn't know what you wanted. That was your end of the bargain. Like, you needed to tell me what you wanted for me to be able to serve you in the way that you wanted to be served. And so for me, when I look at cannabis and I look at all the things that we're talking about, we want to treat it as if it's our mother in a way. We want to treat it in a way of like saying thank you. Moms a lot of the time get martyred, or they martyr themselves a lot of the time, where they're doing all these things and they're not really feeling the appreciation, the gratitude, etc. And when I connect with cannabis, I really feel that energy coming from the plant of like, it's not that it's expecting it, but it feels like it's being used. I mean, we look at what's happening in the hemp market right now. I mean, they're talking about reclassifying hemp and everything. And, I think a lot of people would think I'm not in support of that based on who I am. But in a way, I kind of am. And the reason is that there's been a lot of bad actors. There's been a lot of bad actors creating synthetic cannabinoids and all these things and essentially just like pulling just taking energy. And then the people that are connecting with these things have no idea what they are. And it's not the full version of the plant the way that nature intended it. And like Jack Cruz says, does nature make mistakes? My answer is no to that. I don't think that humans are going to make cannabis better by pulling out things and synthesizing things and isolating things. I'm not saying that humans don't have a right to play lab technician, but the guise that it's ever going to be more effective is silly. I mean, look at how long pharmaceutical companies have been trying to patent something that works as well as cannabis. And they can't. They keep trying to pull out these things, outlaw the natural, monopolize the synthetic, and they haven't been able to do it. Why? Because nature doesn't make mistakes. And so I think if we look into all these things, the gratitude aspect is a huge part too. And I'm glad you brought that up because, without that, what do we really have? We're just using and taking, which is the commodification of what we're existing in the world. And so again, it's, cannabis specifically, and all plants work this way, but because I work with cannabis the most, cannabis really shows you a great microcosm of almost all the things that are going on in the external macrocosm. All this unconscious taking energy that comes from a very egocentric place. Negative polarity is all about taking, because it doesn't naturally produce because it's coming from the absence of what is, which is God, aka love. And so it's very interesting to think about these things and realize that when you get in the right relationship with yourself, and you're giving gratitude to yourself, you're giving gratitude to your spirit guides or whatever, that naturally starts to pour out into everything. You start to be more grateful around the food you eat, the water you drink, the people you connect with, the plants that you choose to connect with, all these things. And as you do that, at least for me, and I imagine you'll corroborate this too, I just live a happier life. So I keep doing it. It feels really good. And what I found is that, in a world full of what does the science say, even though the science is completely bastardized, I just follow what feels good. Rachel's been a big helper in this and her feminine energy just really helping me see like, okay, I have all these logics, that I can go from. And I'm not saying logic has no place, but I do think the heart needs to come before the mind. Otherwise, the mind's just going to go on to whatever it goes on to. But if it's coming from that deep place of why, then you can ensure that you're going to end up somewhere where you feel the gratitude, you feel the appreciation. You can have nothing. You could be on an island with nothing and you'll still feel that connection to everything that is. And that's not something you can buy, and this is what we all have access to, no matter who's listening right now, how much money you have, where you were raised, what disabilities you have. We all have the ability to forgive ourselves and step more into gratitude, step more into intentional life. And that is really what I've been reminded of so many times with cannabis, because the world is a wild place and I enjoy it. There's a lot of things in the world that I enjoy, but also a lot of the world is just full of thirst traps. It's full of things that are vying for your attention. And yeah, sometimes I fall into that, and cannabis helps me come back to myself when I've forgotten once again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to double click a little bit on this kind of extractive mentality that is so pervasive in our culture. I recently had a beautiful conversation with Tenzin Selden, who's been working in a variety of different fields. She came from the East and brought a lot of that kind of Eastern wisdom, Buddhist kind of wisdom that comes from Tibet and Bhutan and these, incredible cultures who've been, deeply challenged by, the Chinese regimes, et cetera. So they've known suffering, they've known, beauty, they've known a lot of this. And she's really working to put forward an idea that changes the model between gross domestic product, which is what we measure a country's worth by. Like there's some multi-billionaires that are like, shit, I got the gross domestic product of fucking Luxembourg or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. But what is gross domestic product? Gross domestic product is if you cut down every single tree in your country and sell it for lumber, guess what? Your GDP goes up. But you have no fucking trees. If you mine and you frack and you take every bit of valuable thing from the earth in your country, your gross domestic product goes up. But what happens to your country? What happens to your people after you do that? So switching that to a different model, gross domestic happiness, gross regenerative product, like how much are you improving? There's other different measures that we need to apply. I think we're always going to want to measure something. We're in an Ahrimanic world where we're weighing and measuring and valuing and studying and analyzing, and we want metrics. But if we just change the metrics, we don't have to overthrow that system entirely and move into Christic consciousness and all be walking around, with Christ consciousness. That'd be great.
Yeah.
However, if we're going to measure something, let's measure the right things. Let's measure something that's going to be for the welfare of our nation and our people over the long haul, rather than just a number that we can jack up by cutting down all our forests.
Yeah. And, it's funny you say that because, life is paradoxical and it's really hilarious in a lot of ways. And we think about like the fact that still to this day, we have billionaires, maybe even trillionaires existing. And you think if money was going to buy happiness, right, it might rent the shit out of it, but it doesn't buy it. We would know because there are people rich enough that they could spend, I don't know, a shit ton of money every day and never run out of it. But yet we're still measuring a country's success by how much like products they can create, aka how much money they're worth, as if that's still the determining factor of these things that are so much more important. Again, money is definitely important. Like I'm not one of the spiritual people who's like, oh, I'm going to live in a shack. Like if we want to create a better world, we're going to need money to do that.
Yeah, money is energy.
Exactly.
So if you can use that energy in a positive way, like good.
Yeah, it's awesome. And at the same time though, like, I talked to Rachel about this a lot. Like I'm so grateful that I didn't hit big in crypto when I was 20 years old or something like that, because it honestly just would have been a big distraction for me. I'm grateful that it's taken the time it has to come into more money because I had a lot of space. I had a lot of times where I had to go through challenges and handle certain things that showed me like money is awesome. Like money is great if you know what to do with it. And money also goes to people who know best what to do with it. If you have a plan, money wants to go to you. And so at the end of the day, if more people could get into their heart before they started trying to get so much money, I think the world would be a much better place. Like I had this unreasonable idea of going over to like somewhere like Saudi Arabia and, with all these people that are billionaires and they kind of think they've figured everything out and meeting them where they're at, saying like, oh, have you ever done Lamborghini Demolition Derby? Right. And showing them like, I can hang with you guys. And then maybe a couple of them are like, man, these American guys are pretty cool. And I'm like, hey, come to peyote with us. And if we get one of those guys to have an enlightening experience, all of a sudden we just freed up billions of dollars that could go into preservation of forests or, education. not schooling, because that's different, but education. It's like, what if we started showing these people like, hey, it's awesome you've done what you've done. It's awesome you have the resources you have, but have you remembered to connect with your heart? Because if you don't, you'll just spend all that money trying to rent what you actually have access to all the time within. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. We're in an interesting world now where there's so much information and there's so much bad information, so that you can go and find, if you want, a study that shows, or an op-ed piece that shows that exercise is actually bad for you. Literally. Like we're in such a crazy time where you say, oh, exercise is bad. Now you can go find people who are saying cannabis, you mentioned this earlier, it's a weapon of mass destruction for your brain. This is your brain on drugs, and you see the frying egg, right? But actually, it's not just propaganda anymore. There's people who are actually saying everything to tell you something that we know can be very good is actually very bad. And so we're in this really strange time where if you're afraid of something, all you have to do is do the right Google search, and you'll find someone to back up that fear, and then say, well, I can't do this. I need to preserve my brain. So what do you think about the current scientific findings and the climate regarding cannabis and neurological, psychological brain health?
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought this up, because I'll start back with something I don't think I brought up on the first show we did together, which is, how did cannabis become illegal in the first place? Like, what started this whole thing? Well, if you go back to the 30s, there were three guys. There was Harry Anslinger, who went on to be the first head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which became the DEA later on. There was William Randolph Hearst, who owned a journalism empire. So we know these days how much mainstream media plays a role in a lot of weird shit. And we have access to the internet. We have access to alternative opinions, even though they may not be pressed as much as the mainstream is, but we can find ways around it. We're connected to each other, even if it's through the internet. So we can talk about these things. But if you go back to the 30s, there was one guy that ran all the newspapers. So if he wanted to create a narrative, no matter what newspaper someone read, it would all be the same narrative. And then there was another guy as well named Andrew Mellon. And he also was into journalism and a lot of different things. These guys kind of all played in the same realms, and they were big investors in nylon and textile industries and things like that. So like you said earlier, cutting down all the trees, right? Why are we still cutting down trees for paper products when we can utilize hemp? Hemp grows so much faster. A grow cycle is 120 days versus a tree is decades, right? And so at the end of the day, they saw hemp and cannabis, because at that point, cannabis was a part of something like 50 or 60% of all medications on the market. Every doctor knew what cannabis was, and a lot of people knew what it was. And also hemp was utilized for so many things. The original Declaration of Independence was written on hemp paper. In the original Jamestown colony, it was required by law that you had to cultivate hemp because it was so useful. They didn't want any land going to waste without growing hemp. And so that's a little bit of the background of how important at one time hemp and cannabis were in this country.
And by the way, William Randolph Hearst, he owned a lot of forests. So,
exactly.
Lumber, he wanted to increase the demand for lumber, which would be printed in all of his papers. And so it was a greedy business decision at the end of the day.
Exactly. And they got together and they were like, oh shit, this thing hemp's going to fuck up a lot of our businesses. They were in cotton as well. And so they put this smear campaign together called Reefer Madness. And when we watch it today, we laugh at it. I think a lot of people don't even really believe at one point that it was real. But I highly recommend anyone listening to this show right now, go back and watch that and realize that this whole thing of demonizing cannabis started from something that was extremely racist. I'm going to say something that I don't believe at all, but I'm going to tell you what these guys did. They literally said that there was a new plant coming over the border called marijuana, and Mexican men were raping white women with this plant. And that's how they got it made illegal, essentially overnight. They went to, lawmakers overnight and were like, this is happening. And they were like, you sure we shouldn't wait for a vote? And they were like, listen, people are getting raped, okay? And they made it illegal. And then in the morning, doctors woke up and were like, wait a minute, they made what illegal? Because they used the term marijuana, but obviously marijuana is cannabis. And so then obviously comes the war on drugs and all these things, just say, no, this is your brain on drugs. Then comes all the entertainment that we already talked about, capitulating cannabis in this very stupid stoner type way. And so now if you read, and there's a great book that I highly recommend everyone go check out, because I think one of the main challenges with the sea of information that we're all in is we just take things as truth. So I want to tell everyone listening right now, don't believe what I'm about to say. Go look it up and see for yourself, because that's what you need to do. Like Carl Jung talks about, there's a time you got to grow up and show up for yourself and individuate. And this is the process of individuation, is when you go, okay, like the fifth agreement, be skeptical, but learn to listen. Like, all right, I'm vibing with this guy maybe. I see what he said. Let me go fact check this and figure it out. And so Peter Grinspoon, who's a Harvard MD, whose father was Lester Grinspoon, one of the biggest cannabis advocates of all time, also a Harvard MD, and best friends with Carl Sagan, and some other people as well that were big cannabis people, big cannabis proponents. And so Lester wrote Marijuana Reconsidered in 1971, I believe. And I mean, he almost nuked his whole career, because if you think talking about cannabis in a positive way these days is a little edgy, do it in the 70s, right? With the war on drugs and everything like that. And so at the end of the day, Peter Grinspoon, his son, just came out with a new book called Seeing Through the Smoke. And, you know, I don't agree with everything he said in there. He definitely believed in the pandemic and things like that, which I have differing opinions on, but I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. One of the things that he illuminated, because for me, for years, I've been connecting with cannabis. I've been seeing extremely productive, fit, incredibly intelligent people connect with cannabis. I've also seen the other side of it. I've seen the people that fit the stoner, lazy archetype. I've seen these things, right? And so when I read this book, I start to realize, oh, no wonder why all these studies coming out about cannabis are so negative. Do you know that in order to receive federal funding in this country to study cannabis, you have to be looking to find a detrimental effect? So let me say it again. You have to be looking for a negative thing if you are to get funding from the feds to study cannabis. So that right there creates an entire bias, all right? But it gets even better. So you may ask, okay, a lot of people grow high quality cannabis these days. You know, we have a lot of places out there that are growing organically. So, you know, Ryan, they must be utilizing some of that cannabis in their studies, right? No, Aubrey. They come from the University of Mississippi, where Peter Grinspoon calls it the moldy mush strain. This is the strain that people, or the variety that people have to work with in order to have to find their detrimental effect. And when the University of Mississippi grows this, I don't know what they're doing, but they're doing it all wrong. Like, I don't think they're getting one thing right. When the researchers get this flower, it's been freeze dried for on average 4 years. It's full of botrytis, which is bud rot, powdery mildew, seeds, which, like, hello, welcome to 1994. We have Sensimilla now, right? And stems and all this stuff. And that's the product they have to use, in which they have to find a detrimental effect. And we wonder why people like Dr. Daniel Amen are out there saying, oh my God, cannabis is a weapon of mass destruction. It's like, listen, you have to follow the money. And I actually brought up some studies here that I'd love to share real quick, because if we start to think about why would all these things be happening, right? Like, why would they want you to have to find a detrimental effect? Let's go over some of the facts of what happens when cannabis gets legalized in a state. So first off, the U.S. pharma market is $600 billion per year, okay? Now, in states that have legalized cannabis, they typically see 25% lower opioid overdose deaths, all right? And that study was done from 1999 to 2010. It was JAMA Internal Medicine in 2014. So that right there, 25% of the opiate market dies in a state, essentially, when cannabis gets legalized. But it gets even better. Adult use legalization linked to fewer synthetic opioid deaths as well, fentanyl, things like that. Benzos go down 12 to 15% after legalization. And so essentially when...
after legalization.
Exactly, right after legalization in that state. Yep. And so if we start to follow the money, and we already know, like, this is the thing that shocked me during the pandemic, is like, guys, I've witnessed cannabis cure cancer. All right. I have seen that with my own 2 eyes. My dad's life was extended over 10 months extra, even though he was still smoking cigarettes and doing all the things that gave him cancer to begin with, because of cannabis. I watched this plant open my father and allow us to create closure where I have never felt agony around his death. I have seen these things happen. And I've also seen the same people that are providing this medicine get their doors kicked in by the DEA. Okay. So when the pandemic came out, I started to I already know these people are bad actors. All right. And so it's shocking to me how many people don't have the ability to use discernment and realize these people are coming from a very negative polarity standpoint. They want domination and control. Now, I'm not going to call them bad because all experience is valid in the eyes of Creator, and it takes a Darth Vader to make a Luke Skywalker. But we got to make a decision at one point, right?
How very Abraxas of you.
Yeah, yeah. And so, like, you know, at some point we have to start realizing, like, these people are out to make more money. That's all they care about. They don't care about our health. That's their mission in this lifetime. We don't have to hate them or call them bad. We just see them for what they are. And we realize that when the same people that put experimental jabs into people start saying cannabis is bad, we just go, yeah, of course you'd say that. That fits perfectly.
You know, one of the things that finally started to make sense for me was when I had Callie Means on my podcast. And, you know, there's so many. You watch like Monday Night Football or, you know, Sunday games. And I watch a lot of sports. It's pretty much the only thing I watch on TV other than like a really good show that I'm looking forward to. Like The Witcher that just came out, though. Henry Cavill was a little better Witcher. Sorry, Liam Hemsworth, you did your best, bro. But
sorry, not sorry.
But like Henry, you fucking killed it. You know, like I'm bless you. Yeah, you fucking held it down for 3 seasons. But so ultimately, when I'm watching television, you're bombarded with pharma commercials, which is like 15 seconds of people being happy and living their normal life, and then another 15 seconds of all the horrendous side effects, like you'll grow more hair and you'll be impotent, have diarrhea, probably die a little earlier, may have a heart attack, may have eczema, and you're like, what the fuck? How does this even work?
My wrist just hurt. I didn't think I needed to go through all that to fix my wrist.
Yeah. And then he was like, no, you don't understand. These aren't advertisements for that particular drug. Yeah, maybe a few people. Ask your doctor about whatever, Rinvoq or whatever the fucking thing is.
Yeah, weird names too.
Whatever it is. Like ask your doctor about, all right, maybe that happens occasionally sometimes. But really what they're doing is they're creating leverage over the station itself. Yeah. And they're the number one, they're the top spender for advertising for all of these mass media companies. So they have leverage. If they start putting out negatively informed, you know, news pieces about what's happening really in the pharma industry, they're going to get their commercial funding dropped. And so there's a profit incentive. And so they're not just advertising their new product, they're actually exercising leverage and control over mass media. And then so to understand that, and then to understand what a threat it poses to the big pharma, you start to see like a different picture, and you start to understand that people are always going to be acting through the self-serving bias to kind of say like, pharmaceuticals are good. It's fine. Let's just keep this thing going and just turn a blind eye to what they could really see as, no, this is the right thing to do or this is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. It's so interesting, man, because you know, at the end of the day, cannabis has been around for like 10,000 plus years. I mean, way longer than that, but that's how much the history goes back to. And there's a great historian, you know, anyone can go look this guy up. His name's Chris Bennett. He's written a bunch of amazing books. His latest one is called Cannabis, Lost Sacrament in the Ancient World. And so when I hear people like Dr. Daniel Amen or any of these people, oh my God, weapons of mass destruction, I'm like, first of all, you know, like I told you before we hit record, I live about 25 minutes from Methadone Mile in Boston. So that's pharmaceuticals. I've seen what that does. All right. It is terrifying. It's like a zombie apocalypse out there. You know, people are literally frozen, halfway fallen over. Okay. And so when I hear people like Dr. Daniel Amen come out and be saying anything about cannabis, I'm like, you shouldn't even have the space to do that, because you as a doctor should be talking about the opioid epidemic and all the other things that come along with it, the benzos and all these ridiculous things, the SSRIs, all these things. Now, does that mean there aren't things to speak about when it comes to cannabis? No, of course there are, right? There's conscious intentional use. But again, cannabis is the effect. It's not the cause. And human beings, it's a lot easier to just play the blame game. All right. And we can see that happening everywhere, because how we do anything is how we do everything. It's a lot more challenging to actually see the cause as like something happening inside you. Like, why can we sit here and talk about cannabis and obviously have an intentional relationship with it, be able to show up, run businesses, go on podcasts, speak articulately, do all this stuff while other people can't? Well, that means that, like everything in life, it's not objective in nature. So what's going on? It's not that cannabis equals this. So we got to go deeper. We got to figure out what's going on in the psyche and hearts and emotions of people that are leading them to get into these undesirable relationships with these plants or these pharmaceuticals or whatever it is. And that's a much more challenging conversation, because it brings in how out of alignment We are as human beings. A lot of us, me before I got into everything I do now in the last 15 years, corporate environments, fluorescent lighting, all these things that I was told would make me happy. Go to school, get your degree, all these things. And I think that we need a big overhaul. We need more options anyway. We need more ability to tell people like, hey, there are other things besides just going to a trade school or college. Like it's very multifaceted, and I don't pretend to have the answer for it. But I know that I don't have the answer, and I know that life has not found the answer yet in the collective anyway. And so, at the end of the day, cannabis has been around for 10,000 years. You'd think if it was as bad as any of these studies say it is, we would have wiped it out. We wouldn't be here anymore. Cannabis works with the largest regulatory system in our body. The reason cannabis works as if it's a panacea medicine is because it's working with this regulatory system called the endocannabinoid system. And in that controls our sleep, our appetite, our nervous system regulation, so many different things, to a level where our CB1 and CB2 receptor sites, what actually interacts with either the endogenous cannabinoids or endocannabinoids that we produce endogenously, which are 2-AG and anandamide, which anandamide is the bliss molecule. It's what you get with the runner's high.
It's also in chocolate.
Yeah, exactly. It's in chocolate, And so, again, if we start to have dysregulation in our bodies, cannabis, the phytocannabinoids in the cannabis plant, THC, CBD, ones people know, those fit directly into the same receptor sites that our endogenous cannabinoids do. And people like to think that that's somehow just a mistake. It's kind of crazy to me, right? Like, it shows that we have co-evolved over this plant or with this plant over millennia. And yet, you look at the Rastas, they're connecting with cannabis sometimes at 8 years old, and they're smoking a lot. Look at Bob Marley, all right? Like, these are our scientific studies, guys. Results don't lie.
Longitudinal.
Exactly, longitudinal. Now, again, that doesn't mean that there aren't things we can talk about like we are with regards to more intention, more conscious use, harm reduction, making sure you know where you're getting your flower, because cannabis is also a bioremediator. So that's great if you're a land like Chernobyl that's been mass irradiated and they're planting hemp and cannabis to suck all that out of the soil. But it's not good if you're a human being connecting with cannabis that was grown in toxic soil or with chemical salt nutrients. And these are the things that, Dr. Daniel Amen, for instance, never put in the study. We don't know what the quality of cannabis he was utilizing was, except for the University of Mississippi. There was also a lot of polysubstance use reported in the people that he was in his study. So, again, like, correlation doesn't equal causation. And at the end of the day, I think that it's always worth having a real look at this. Like, take some ceremonial grade cannabis, do some studies on it, figure out what's going on. Like, I think that's fun. I think we can always get more conscious. But I think this fear-mongering bullshit, when I'm seeing people walk down the street as zombies on fentanyl, just seems a little ridiculous, at this point.
Yeah. I've heard something, and I haven't done the proper research to explore it, but I'm pretty sure that it's solid. So you mentioned marijuana, which is, I suppose, a Spanish name for cannabis, and how they made up a story about, Mexican immigrants coming over and raping white women, and that's why they made it illegal. So we told that story. But I also heard that the criminalization of cannabis was actually directly intended to target Black Americans and the Black community, and actually put them behind bars because there was a racist agenda at play in the 50s, 60s, etc. Yeah. What's the fact and what's the fiction in that story?
It's actually very factual. Some of the first people that were really big in cannabis were jazz musicians. And you go back and you listen to some of that jazz from like the 20s and 30s, it's popping off. It's so good. And so at the end of the day, think about this. What are prisons? The myth is that there are dangerous people in the world and we got to put them away. And a lot of the time that's accurate. Like, let's be real. Like, prisons do house a lot of people that are murderers and whatever else. But at the end of the day, prisons have been privatized. So someone like a soap company, for instance, can buy rights to a prison and have essentially legal slavery through people creating soap or whatever this company creates. And so, the governing bodies got together and they're like, listen, there's not enough violent offenders. Like, there's some out there, but there's not enough. And we had to outlaw slavery. So what do? Well, we just disguise it as something else. We create all these victimless crimes. Because again, at the end of the day, even if someone's using fentanyl and they're using it themselves, to me, that's not a crime. That's just someone who's in a lot of pain and needs some support, and needs some help. So at the end of the day, they created all of these statutory, rules that essentially allow them to put these people in prison, knowing full well that these areas are going to be the areas where people abuse substances of all different types the most because they're in the most pain. They've been the most marginalized. They have a lot of different things going on. And so essentially for me, what I've come up to in my research is that this is really just to create legal slavery. That was the entire thing. Ultimately, if you go even deeper than that, it's about control and fear, because that's what the negative polarity runs on. But at the end of the day, it's also about restricting people from doing things that we've been doing for eons and eons. There's almost never been a time where humans have not been connected with cannabis. When you go into Chris Bennett's work, whether it's the Scythians or ancient Jerusalem or ancient China or ancient America, Central America, cannabis was everywhere. It was all over the Silk Road. They found it in the holies of holies in ancient Jerusalem. It was everywhere. And it's one of the big things they've kept from us. And so at the end of the day, they don't want us connecting with something that's going to open our minds. So the question becomes also, well, Ryan, why did they legalize it now then? Why are they kind of coming to this legalization moment? Well, my theory on that is that they've done a good enough job. And I got to see this when I worked in the industry, and you brought it up as well. People treat it like an intoxicant. They have been programmed to think it's not alcohol, so I'm doing better. I can just smoke my pre-rolls and numb out, eat a bunch of Oreos or whatever, and that's whatever. So they have now predictably programmed people to think cannabis is nothing like we're talking about. And so, really what I see me doing in a way in Hamilton Souther, all these people that are talking about cannabis is re-educating people around what this plant really is, and what it has the ability to do in the human experience. Because at the end of the day, all of the things that have happened to cannabis have been a part of the fact that they realized early on that when people connected to this plant, they opened up. They didn't need all of these material possessions. These jazz musicians, they weren't usually very rich, and yet they were so happy. They were just in the clubs having a blast, and that was terrifying to the people that wanted people in control and fear states. Because again, when people are upregulated, they can't critically think, they can't discern, they're easily controllable. We saw that during the pandemic too. So that's, for me, in my research I've done, why they marginalized these certain communities, these ethnic communities and people like that, because they knew they'd be using them the most. And they knew that if they wanted to bring back slavery in a legal way, they would create these statutory, silly victimless crimes that would allow them to put people in prison. And then it's well, hey, they broke the rules. They need to be in here. And we're going to give them some work when they're in here so they don't lose their mind and have nothing to do. And so it sounds like, once again, they're being the good guy. But no, they're never the good guy, okay? Yeah. And that's okay, right? Darth Vader's never going to be the good guy either, all right? It just is what it is. And if we treat this all like a movie and like a dream, which is exactly what A Course in Miracles says, or the Atharva Veda, or any of these old texts, then we just see it for what it is and we go, okay, I clocked you. I know what you are now. Thank you for showing me who you are. And now that I've seen who you are, I don't need to keep being well, are you still? No, you are. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. That's completely okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's... the work function that happens in prison is just one aspect, but there's also the subsidization of these private prisons. Every prisoner they get, just like a college, everybody who's going there, and they get a tuition. Mm-hmm. They get a government subsidized tuition for every prisoner they have. So the prison industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, the big food, all of these different things, they have perverse profit incentives that aren't directed towards the welfare of people. They're directed towards the welfare of these corporations and the aggregation of these corporations in industries that all support each other. How can milk get together and put out ads for milk? Or beef come out with a commercial that say, where's the beef? Well, there's a bunch of people who have an interest in beef that put out a whole fucking commercial, or a bunch of people that have an interest in milk. And I personally like milk, particularly cream from grass-fed, sources.
Raw milk.
And grass-fed beef, I'm a big fan of that. So, all blessings to you, beef and milk, you did your thing. But it just shows it's these groups aggregate naturally because they have aligned profit interests. Mm-hmm. And when government and prisons and government and pharma, because of lobbying and because of political contributions and all these things, there's these kind of combined interests that are at play that create these kind of perverse incentives where the people getting left out of the equation are citizens. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really what, we need to start looking at is are the leaders, do they really, not just pretending that they care about people,
they're good at that.
But do they really, they're super good at that. But do they really care about us? Do they really care about our nation? And if you really care about your nation, you can really care about the world too. I don't think those two things have to be diametrically opposed. You can do both. I think the thriving world is every nation thriving and then having having everybody representing that nation to represent the world. So people from different cultures, but we're not trying to homogenize. I mean, I think the nightmare that a lot of us are tracking, the homogenization of all cultures into a one world totalitarian state. And that may seem like a conspiracy theorist fever dream, but this is an overt plan that a certain subsection of people absolutely have. And, while it may be inevitable that we do come together in some form to represent Earth, you referenced the Galactic Federation. At some point, let's say we are contacted by, Three Eye Atlas comes and they got the whole fucking UN of the Galactic Federation. They're like, yo, who's going to represent you? Well, we're going to want representatives of all of our nation to be able to come together, the best of each culture, and actually say, like, okay, this is what Earth is about. But we've lost that plot completely. And so in place of that is a very much, much darker and scarier idea of what this one world coming together looks like.
Yeah. And you know what, to me, the best part of this is like the part where like, it really starts to be like, I don't know what Star Wars it was, but the one where you start to realize like the good guys are going to win as long as they realize this, is that what do these corporations exist on? What can they not exist on? Put it that way. If they have no money, they cease to exist. Well, who's giving the money? Each one of us. And at the end of the day, if we start to become more aware of where we're putting our money, aka our energy, then this house of cards crumbles very quickly. I think the challenge is that we're in this kind of gap right now. And this is one of the reasons I'm so big on cannabis, because like I talked about earlier, can bridge this gap very well, where I think the ultimate muscle that we're meant to develop here in this lifetime is discernment of what true good and true evil are. Now, good and evil imply duality, right? It's still in the illusion here because, you can't have somethingness and oneness, right? But at the end of the day, if we're playing a game here in the 3D realm of duality, then there's a lot of people that might be evil and say they're good, or there might be a lot of people that really think they're good, but actually are not coming from a place of good. And our objective is to be able to clock that and not judge it, but just practice discernment. Like, not my flavor of ice cream. I just don't like pistachio. I don't think it's a bad flavor. I just don't prefer it. And when we start to do that, when we see these pharmaceutical commercials or whatever, we'll just laugh at them and be like, it's hilarious. And the more of us that do that, the less money they'll make, and the less money they make, the less control they have. And so we really hold all the power. And for everyone listening to this show right now, like no matter who you are, how much money you have $10 in your pocket right now, that's all you have to your name, that's still power. Like you could choose to go to, I'm not going to say any names, but like a typical sub place, or you could go to a mom and pop place that doesn't use seed oils. Maybe you're in Austin. I love coming to Austin because I don't have to worry about seed oils everywhere. In Boston, no one knows about that yet. But, again, like we all have that power. And I think the more of us that come together, I mean, cannabis is a great, like the answer for me is decentralization. Like, a great example of decentralized healthcare was cannabis up until it was started to become legalized. I had a whole network of people that if I knew someone that was diagnosed with cancer, I could reach out and they'd send them RSO completely for free. That's decentralized medicine. We didn't need any governing body to give us permission. We just knew it worked, so we just got it. And so at the end of the day, I think decentralization is the answer. I've seen this a lot with social media. A lot of people I talk to, a lot of content creators are going through like a lot of challenges, just being like, it doesn't seem like I can put my heart out there anymore and get the same attention I once got, because now it's kind of like pay to play. And I'm not here to diss it. It is what it is. Instagram and whatever these platforms are can run however they want to run. It's their company. But at the end of the day, why don't we as content creators get together and be like, hey, if we get 1,000 of us in a room and someone's got an offer, someone else cuts someone in an affiliate deal, they blast it to their email list, and we could do all this without social media. We can have fun and we can use social media when we want to, but we're not slaves to it anymore. Like we feel like we are. And so I really feel like this is part of the big answer, is like starting to realize we really do have the power here. We can take power back in terms of where we're putting our dollars. We can start to talk to one another. We can start to realize that the powers that shouldn't be are simply trying to put us together. It's like in high school, you know this because we're men, right? We have a lot of testosterone at these early ages. And if we come into school and some kid's like, dude, that guy over there called your mom fat, you're going to take that? Like, what are you, like a pussy? Like, it's like, that's what's happening in a big way in left and right, blue, red, all these things. If we could all just smoke a joint and realize, oh my God, we're all getting played here, and get together and be like, hey, why don't we all start growing different vegetables? Why don't we start getting together in community? When they try to take away our restaurant access or our movie theater access next time, it's like, it's all good, man. We don't even need your stuff. We actually prefer it at home. We can hit volcano bags here. We actually like this a lot more. We'll start to realize we do and always have had all the power. It's just an illusion that we don't.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get practical here with some questions for people. Indica versus sativa versus hybrid. What do you think the use cases are if someone's trying to intentionally connect with cannabis for these different strains and varietals?
So the one thing I'll say is that, in a way, these classifications these days are really a myth at this point because everything's been hybridized. But I do still use them because technically if like someone comes up to me and they don't know a lot about cannabis and they're like, should I do indica or sativa? And I'm like, it's all a myth, man. It's not even real. They're like, now I don't get anything about this, right? So I'll still use them for sake of conversation. But what I want people to know is that typically everything has been hybridized. Unless you're a grower, and this is one of the reasons I recommend growing your own, and you can purchase your own genetics. Because you can find companies like Ace Seeds, for instance, or whatever, that preserve these heirloom and landrace genetics that are like almost a pure sativa or almost a pure indica. Like I grew this Uzbekistan hash plant one time called Taskentai. So unique. Like I really don't have any other strain I can compare it to. And then if you grow like Jamaican lamb's bread or like any of these things, you start to realize, whoa, like these are way different. It's like how most dogs are like a mutt, right? But then you see a purebred and you're like, that thing's different. Like it just looks majestic, it's very unique. And so at the end of the day, what I will say is that strains that lean more indica are really good at opening up the bottom 3 chakras. They're really good at doing a lot of this like trauma resolution work, safety work, even like a little bit of like, who am I? Like your seat of power and your solar plexus. They're really good at that because they do slow you down a lot. They help you subtract. Whereas hybrids, something that's around a 50-50, are really good at opening the heart up. They're like really good at the heart chakra. And then strains that lean more sativa are really good at opening the top 3 centers. What do we know about sativas, right? I used to call myself a sativa diva. When I connect with sativa, I just want to talk people's ears off, all right? And I already do that naturally, so it's kind of challenging. That's why I don't connect a lot of sativas anymore, one of the reasons. But what I like to do is combine them all together. So, I like to make a salad of sorts where I take some indica, some hybrid, and some sativa, and I mix it together because my ego will want to think like, oh, I need the bottom 3 chakras today. But I don't really know that. Like, wise is the man who knows he does not know. So for me, I do my best to put as many strains together. I was talking to Hamilton about this. He's like, dude, sometimes I put like 30 different strains together. And I'm like, yeah, I love that. I'll have trim from like past harvests that'll have like tons of different strains and I'll throw them all together when we do our Breathe with Cannabis workshops in person or things like that. And people get sent. And the reason why is that a lot of people, even when I mention sativa, get a little puckered. They're like, oh, I don't want anxiety and paranoia and things like that. Like that variety really gets a lot of people nervous. And I understand that. It is upregulating. It does add a lot of energy to you. It brings up a lot of that nervous system sympathetic response. And so the great thing is that if you combine a sativa with an indica that has higher CBD, well, CBD counteracts the negative side effects, aka like the challenges, like the too much at once type feeling of Delta-9 THC. So you get this beautiful entourage effect. And that's exactly the reason why I was saying earlier, like, humans think we can pull these things out and play God and whatever it is. And it's never going to work as good because, the entourage effect is a silly word or a, fancy word for essentially meaning that when the plant is connected in the way that nature intended it to be connected with, it works better, right? Shocker. And so for me, I like combining all of them together. Now, what I'll add on to this is that it's really important where you source your medicine. Like what I'll tell people is, like I mentioned earlier, it's a bioremediator. And, along with understanding what indica, hybrid, sativa are and what they're good for, what the use cases are, if you're going to a dispensary that's growing with chemical salt nutrients and you're going there and the growers are not healthy and things like that, like, you talk to someone like Hamilton or your Wachuma, person or any of these people, they'll tell you like they have to really empty themselves to grow this medicine. Like that's why there was one person in the village that like usually wasn't connected to the rest of the village that would know what energy they were growing these things with. And so that's why I really feel like cannabis, I have a whole course called Grow with Cannabis, because when you grow this plant and then you connect with it, like in Don Juan, they talk about this in the first Adventures of Don Juan book. When he's like, oh, can I have some of yours? He's like, no, you can't. You have to grow this yourself. Like, you have to go plant the weed or the smoke and actually like connect with it. And then when you ingest it after, you get to experience yourself in a clearer, more pure way because you don't have the ego there and things like that. And so that's what I would say in addition to the indica hybrid sativa thing to make it practical is you want to be looking for people that are cultivating in a no-till fashion. Now, this is also said, there's kind of terms that are a little bit synonymous, but they can mean different things. But super soil, grown in soil, period, like any of these things can speak to the fact that, okay, maybe they're doing this in a way that's really conducive to what I'm in alignment with. But at the end of the day, you still kind of want to go feel out the company. Like, who's in this? How long have they been doing this? Are they a grower that was growing back when they could have got arrested for it and they really loved the plant and they were doing it because of that? Or are they just doing it because the projection on the spreadsheet showed them cannabis was the next cash cow and now they're here? I worked for a company that called their cannabis company, they named it after their yacht. Like, that's not the energy I would buy my cannabis from. And so that's another very practical thing that, again, like we're talking about, where are you putting your money? If you can grow it yourself, even better, because that's really, in my opinion, the way it's meant to be connected with. But I get it. It's a project. Not a lot of people want to do that, and I respect it. So if you can find people that are growing in a no-till setup, outdoors, sun-grown, even better, or if they're growing indoor, utilizing something that's going to mitigate EMFs like biogeometry or Aries Tech or any of these things that can start to, it shows you these people are aware of the energetics behind how they're cultivating. So that's what I would say with regards to that.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to finish off this conversation, so you referenced CBD, and I think that has had a huge explosion and people are, pretty well aware of that. But then kind of sneaking in on the backside of that, there was CBN and CBG, right? And again, this is part of this, like, let's pull out this single thing, which can be helpful. Yeah. And also, there's the beauty and the entourage effect of the whole plant. But what's the difference between CBD, CBN, and CBG?
Great question. So CBD is really good for anti-inflammatory reasons. That's one of the biggest reasons it got big. It was kind of like, purported as like an Advil replacement, things like that. Now, I will say that CBD is a less potent cannabinoid. So if I tell someone to take 500 milligrams of CBD, they kind of look at me like, are you sure about that? Because they're used to THC, where like 5 milligrams can be a lot for someone. CBD is not intoxicating. So that's one of the biggest differentiating factors there.
If it's CBD isolate.
Exactly.
Because I had my very first, deepest cannabis experience when I thought I was taking a CBD isolate. And my brother, Dr. Dan, was like, you can actually push the dose to 300 milligrams, 500 milligrams, and you'll really feel a profound effect. You don't do this all the time, but every once in a while, he recommends that for like neuroinflammation, a variety of things. So I just got gifted a bottle that had 1,000 milligrams. So I chugged half of it. Woo! And it was not a CBD isolate. It was a full spectrum extract. So I got so high. I was just watching a show with my wife, and then I started like massaging the fascia in my eyelids, and I was like, oh no, this is just starting.
Ordeal, not an experience,
Totally. And it ended up being beautiful, and it actually started me on my intentional cannabis journey. So it was a blessing. Yeah. But nonetheless, something, important to recognize, know if it's a CBD isolate or if it's a full spectrum CBD extract.
And also, like, a lot of the people that are selling these things, like I had a friend, a student of mine who is a nurse as well, and she's in Texas. And so she went to one of the stores around it because you guys don't have medical or anything. Like, I think you barely have decrim. I think you have decrim here in Austin. You can have like an ounce on you or something, but you have no medical, no rec. So what's happened? All right. It hasn't stopped cannabis from coming in. It's just made a bunch of synthetic cannabinoid markets. So she went to a gas station and bought a bunch of these CBD products and had them independently tested. All of them had methamphetamine in them, like straight up methamphetamine. Wow. So that's the challenge of the hemp space. And that's one of the reasons hemp is being reclassified. I think there's some other maybe darker reasons, but that's the reason they're giving us. And it is valid. I mean, there's a lot of weird shit going on in the hemp market. So CBD definitely gets this like crazy, kind of flack because, it's non-intoxicating if you do an isolate, right? We are doing that. But it's kind of like, it got a lot of publicity when it's not that it shouldn't have. It's just that we should really be talking about full spectrum stuff, right? And so CBD, I think, is overhyped a lot. I think it's definitely useful, for headaches and things like that, but you got to take a lot of it,
Or post-concussion care.
Yeah,
I think there's
post-concussion care.
Some good research on that.
Yeah, but when it comes to CBG, on the other hand, CBG, funnily enough, is the cannabinoid that every cannabinoid starts its life as. So the way they really get a lot of CBG out of a plant is they just harvest it really early. So CBG will then form into CBD or THC or any of these cannabinoids later on. CBN, on the other hand, is what happens when delta-9 THC degrades. So that's why CBN, or that's why actually if you take a nug of flower and you leave it out in the air, like you leave it on the counter for a couple of days, and maybe before that it was like sativa, like you tried it and you were like, oh, this got me upbeat. You can leave it on a counter for a couple of days, especially if it's like somewhere like Boston where it's like really low humidity right now and cold out. And if you try that a couple of days later, it'll be much more couch locking because a lot of the THC degraded into CBN, and CBN, like it's being purported as like the sleep cure, I think you mentioned before you have some sleep challenges. And so like for you, I don't know if you've ever tried CBN, but it's like the thing for sleep. For me, it feels like I got hit by a bus when I take it. Like I wake up so like, oh, like what time is it? And I sleep very good. I learned from Rachel because she doesn't have good sleep patterns. I've never been so grateful that I just naturally sleep well, but she's used it with a lot of effect as well. Because for me, I can sleep like a baby regardless. So I always utilized her to be like, okay, how well does this really work? And it does really work, but it definitely gives me that green over the next day. So that's how they differ a lot. Like CBN is definitely mildly intoxicating. Like it doesn't give me the same effect that delta-9 THC does, even though it's degraded from delta-9 into that. It gives me this very like, I don't know, just heavy feeling. Like it's like, that's what I feel from it. I don't really feel like, whoa, like THC does when your mind's going a million miles a minute and you're, tuning into all this stuff. It just really helps me feel like I'm just like grounded. It's almost like if there was one cannabinoid that related to the feeling tobacco gives me, it's CBN. It just sits you down and it makes you present. Whereas CBD is an anti-inflammatory relief. And then CBG does a couple different things. It does have anti-inflammatory properties, but a lot of people utilize it actually for like an energetic boost. THCV is used more often for that, like for energy. But I do see, like I worked with a hemp company for a little while who sent me all these beautiful tinctures they utilized, and the energy blend had a lot of CBG in it. And I had heard about this before, and I was like, oh, let me try it. Because I don't usually use cannabis at all during the day. I'm just like a nighttime type person. I was talking to Ryan about this before we started. I'm like, yeah, man, I would never be able to connect with cannabis and go on a podcast like this and things like that. It's just not how cannabis works with me. Other people I know, they can do that. More respect to them than anyone, but I don't know how they do that. But
one of the greatest of all time does it.
Yeah,
does it quite often.
I know.
Mr. Joe Rogan himself.
I don't know how he does that, man.
And I remember like before I had a good relationship with cannabis and I was doing a lot of podcasts with him, he'd pass it around and I'd take just the smallest little puff because I was like, I don't fucking want to be in front of millions of people and just like be in my head thinking about, did I just say that the right way?
Yeah,
or
forget where you're going.
How could that be perceived? And then ideas that come through and I'm like, is it such a good, where did it go? Fucking gone again.
That's my biggest fear of when I go on Rogan is this feeling of like, dude, I hope he doesn't think like, man, here, hit this joint. I'm like, buddy, no, like I'll do that after
You're
with
the
you.
Cannabis guy.
Dude, if not me, then who? I'm like, I got to show out for the whole world of cannabis,
Yeah.
No pressure, but those are how those cannabinoids differ. And what I would tell people is once again, like the hemp market, the cannabis market is regulated in a lot of ways. And I'm not usually a red tape guy, but I do understand that there's bad actors and I do respect the fact that there's deep regulations in the cannabis industry. That being said, there are a lot of things that aren't regulated, aren't looked at as bad, that I really think in 5 years, it'll be like the mesothelioma ads. Like if you were in this place, you're entitled to compensation. I really think that chemical salt nutrients are going to be one of those things. And they're a pretty big standard in the cannabis space right now.
I mean, aren't they a pretty big standard in every plant?
In general. Yeah, exactly. And, a lot of these things, and also like, different pesticides, herbicides, like the industry keeps a lot of the bad ones out. But when you get into the hemp industry, that's like the dirtiest place ever. Now, again, there's a lot of great companies out there, just like with cannabis, like they're not all bad, but a lot of the biggest ones are like working with some really poisonous shit. Like they don't test for the same things in the hemp market. And this includes the THCA market, which we didn't talk about yet, but we can get into that if you want to. Like, what is THCA? Have you seen these popping up around like Texas and things like that? Like this idea of THCA?
So I've seen, I haven't tracked that nomenclature, but I do remember I was walking through Miami, and I see, oh shit, there's a dispensary. It must be legal here in Florida now. And I walk in, and it's all Delta 8.
Mm-hmm.
And so they got around the regulations on Delta 9 THC by making Delta 8. And I was like, well, maybe it's kind of the same. And it's kind of a little bit the same, but it's not quite. It's like something's a little off.
I've had a lot of people get really messed up over Delta 8. I had it a few times, and I actually like mildly enjoyed it. Like, it was like, oh, this is whatever. I just prefer cannabis. You know?
It was same with me. It was like, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't the thing I was looking for.
Yeah. I had a friend who, someone said, oh, there are hemp gummies out. And so he thought like, oh, CBD. Like, so he was just, he had the munchies. He was eating a bunch of them. Then he realized they were 25 milligram Delta 8 gummies, and he had like 8 of them. And he went through like a whole ordeal. He had to call his partner and have her guide him out of the club he was in because he couldn't remember how to get out of it, and she'd been there before. She wasn't even with him at the time.
Why would you have 8?
I have
those. That's a really heavy dose.
I know. That's a
Joey Diaz dose.
Yeah, that's like a star thing, his stars. If I ever hang out with that guy, I'll have my spidey senses up to 1,000, I'll be like, hey, have this drink. I'm like, no, I'm not taking anything from you, dude. All right, I've watched enough of your episodes to know what you do. But here's the big thing. So I'm a big supporter of THCA in certain ways, but also in certain other ones I'm not.
So what is it, first of all?
All right. So this is going to blow your listeners' minds, okay? So what if I told you that even though cannabis is illegal federally, all right, that's the myth, that actually cannabis became legalized in 2018? What if I told you that? You'd probably be like, no, like I can look up the law right now and see cannabis is still outlawed, right? Well, what happened is, and this is like actually comedic as hell, the governing bodies and the law bodies that created the hemp, the farm bill that passed in 2018 that federally legalized hemp, they don't understand basic cannabinoid science. So when they put unrestricted amounts on THCA, because they saw THCA, because the acid form of THC is not intoxicating, right? If I had a bunch of THCA here, I could feed it to you and you wouldn't feel anything from it. So they didn't understand the process of decarboxylation. And I'm going to break down what that fancy word means. So basically, if you have, like if I had a nug of my cannabis flower right here, all right, and I tested that in a professional lab, there would almost be like negligible amounts of Delta 9 THC that were on that. It'd be like 0.1, like maybe 0.01 even. And the reason for that is that it takes a process called decarboxylation to have the chemical change from THCA into Delta 9 THC. Essentially what happens is you got to put a flame to it. When you ignite it, that heat, and also oxygen can do it too, will transfer the acid form of THC into Delta 9. So what a lot of people said was, well, wait a minute. What if we just grow THCA hemp flower, right? And we can test it. It comes up all THCA, and the governing bodies have an unrestricted amount of THCA you can have in these hemp products. So that's why you're now starting to see these seltzers pop up and all these things with THC in it. They're doing a lot of weird shit when it comes to the extracts and like the edibles and things like that. But with flower, anyone watching right now, I think there's like a couple states that have outlawed it. I think Oregon's one of them, which is already legal there. There's a couple that have like already legalized that probably just had their market getting hit a lot from people buying like THCA hemp flower. But basically, you can go online right now, and I'll give you a place in the show notes to go to this if you want to. But there's a place you can go and buy ceremonial grade THCA hemp flower from a licensed place. They're completely above board, and you can get it shipped right to your door. So even in places that are legal, in Boston, they have delivery and things like that, but it took us years to come out with delivery. So a lot of places that are just legalizing, it'll take you like 4 years. Even though they say like 6 months, yeah, I'll see you in 4 years. That's how this stuff goes. So, you could literally not even have to leave your house right now. You can get it delivered through the mail completely legally. And so that's the benefit of THCA is like, hey, it's giving a lot of people access to a plant that should have never been taken away from humanity in the first place. But also the hemp market is really dirty and they don't have to go through the same regulations. So you'll find a lot of people out there selling THCA, but I do not recommend anyone go online and just find the first place and be like, sick, I can buy weed online and buy it, because it will probably poison you. It's got a lot of pesticides, a lot of glyphosate, a lot of pyrethrins. I mean, shit that you would never want to be putting in your lungs. Because the other thing too is that a lot of these pesticides, herbicides, the argument people will give is, well, look, it's totally safe on consumables. But it's like, yeah, that may be true on like a tomato, which I already call bullshit. Like, I still don't think they're safe to be eating. But what happens when you put a flame to that? What happens? What chemical change happens when you grew with pyrethrins or something dangerous, and then you're putting a flame to it after?
You don't smoke glyphosate?
Yeah, dude, I know. I
Whoa.
should start, dude.
Whoa.
I know.
Come on,
Is the high
man.
good?
Yeah. Fucking
Yeah.
you can put that in your
Yeah.
crack pipe. Let's go.
Yeah. That shit will make you dead.
Who needs bufo when
Yeah,
you can smoke
exactly.
Roundup, bro?
Yeah.
Come on.
That might be the opposite polarity. Like how hot and cold are opposites, you know? Bufo and glyphosate might be the opposite polarities.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
funny.
Well, it's an interesting time. And so tell me about this new bill that passed and like, what does this actually mean?
Yeah.
And what's going to happen to the market?
Well, I mean, it's very preliminary right now. I was just connecting with a good buddy of mine who's done a lot more research than I have. This just happened like last week. And so what I understand about it is that essentially what my buddy told me is they're going to try to go back to the 90s with cannabis. They're going to start, what my buddy told me is that what they're saying so far is that they're going to completely re-illegalize the hemp market. Okay. So right now, they're not saying anything's going to happen to cannabis, but based on the research he's done and what he told me, and I have heard this mentioned, they're going to start to re-illegalize seeds again, which like you want to talk about going back to the dark ages, you know, like illegalizing seeds, that's crazy. I mean, I've been getting seeds in the mail since like 2010, you know, so even before cannabis was legal, I was able to get them because you buy them as souvenirs, you know, and so at the end of the day, what they're going to do is they're going to take back the hemp market and completely make it illegal again, which is going to put a lot of companies that are doing the right thing out of business. It'll also put a lot of the, you know, other companies out too. But it will also restrict a lot of people from getting very affordable CBD. I remember at the dispensary, before hemp was legal, this is like 2016, 2017, we worked at a dispensary, Rachel and I, and people would come in, you know, they're maybe in their 60s, 70s. They have no intention of getting high. They just have a lot of chronic pain and they want to get off opiates. So they're coming in and, you know, for us at our dispensary, we only had so much space to grow flower. And so it was like either we grow THC flower or CBD flower. But if we grow CBD flower, we have to sell it at the same price that THC is, or we're not going to meet our bottom lines. So the great thing the hemp market has done is allowed this massive scale of hemp to be grown so that people that need CBD and whatever can get these other minor cannabinoids for a pretty affordable rate. That's going to go away as well, which is really challenging to a lot of people. Now, what my buddy said, and this I can't, you know, say 100% I fact checked this, but what he believes is going to happen is that they're going to start, they're going to reschedule cannabis, which is going to seem like a really good thing to a lot of people. They're going to reschedule it. And what that's going to do is put it in the same class as pharmaceuticals. But the challenge that's going to happen when that happens is that now, in order to be a licensed cultivator, you're going to have to meet DEA standards, which just the application alone is about 250 grand. So you figure who are the most people that have 250 grand to shell out for an application? The big MSOs, the multi-state organizers, you know, multi-state operators. Not the mom and pop shops that are growing organically and keeping things small because that's what they can afford. They're not going to be able to do that.
So it's a centralization play.
Exactly. It's a centralization thing. And what that's going to do is it's going to drive the price of cannabis back up, which a lot of cannabis people will say, like, thank God, because the market right now is tanked. I mean, when I grew up around cannabis, I could find pounds for like 6, 7K if you were getting it from California and you were getting OG or something like really unique. Nowadays, what I hear from my friends that are, you know, even in the legal industry, when we were at the dispensary back in 2016, pounds on the legal market, I knew because we did a lot of wholesale at other dispensaries and other grows, they were going for $5 or $6K. Now, $400 to $800 on the legal market. So, you know, let's talk about a potential benefit. It will bring the price back up, allegedly. That's what I see a potential positive being. But at the end of the day, this is why I tell everyone, learn to grow your own. Because anytime you put your power, like it's great that you can buy THC in now. It's awesome, right? But still, you're depending on a law that at any point a bunch of lizard beings can change, you know? So, you know what I mean? Like, do you want to put your faith in the same people that put experimental jabs and did all these things and kicked in people's doors that were helping people heal cancer? Like, we know what they do. So just decentralize yourself as much as you can. Learn to cultivate your own medicine. You know, learn to stock seeds, learn to talk to other cultivators that can grow other varieties. The same way that back in World War II, people, or maybe it was World War I, I think it was II, you know, people started growing their own vegetables again and started getting community. Like, this is always the answer. But that's so far what we know about the bill that's good, that essentially passed. I think it has to pass I always get this confused, the House next, or it passed the House and needs to pass the Senate next, one or the other. But even if it did, we'd have a year where they could implement new things. And so I have a lot of friends in the hemp market that are not too worried about it. They're like, yeah, it looks really bad right now, but over the next year, we'll have a lot of changes to it. And it will probably end up some kind of hybrid of like, what I would love to see is just a little bit stricter regulation so we don't have all these terrible bad actors getting into it and poisoning people, but still having the access to be able to at least grow, like, even if you take away THCA flower, like, please allow us to grow hemp, because a lot of people need CBD and these other things. And if you're growing hemp, you can turn these into products and people can get them much cheaper than they can buy at a cannabis dispensary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, let's circle back to the beginning here before we wrap this up. So we talked about paranoia being a feature, not a bug of cannabis, and I fully believe this. And I got to watch, my teacher guide someone through an ordeal that she was having, and by first naming it as an ordeal and placing the ceremonial consciousness, that idea in and of itself did so much of the work. He said, like, this is not an accident, this is a feature. She was like, I feel my heartbeat increasing. I feel like all of these, and she was, every time she listed one of the things that was happening, a state of panic started to rise and the energy started to rise, and that started to be contagious in the whole space, because we're creating a shared field, right? So he just calmly kind of worked her through that. But since you work with clients directly, if someone wanted to go through and be like, look, I want to utilize cannabis or Gemaru as kind of an ordeal, I want to see what's really going on inside. And you were the guy that was there to help guide them through. So, and this is something that maybe people can even think of this themselves if they accidentally find themselves in an ordeal. Like, I heard a story of someone who was, spending the night over at Ram Dass's house and got hungry in the middle of the night after working and just ate some fucking cookies or something, and then was like, uh-oh, like, I shouldn't have eaten the cookies at Ram Dass's house. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But so how do you help guide someone through when they're starting to experience this kind of panic sensation that can arise, this paranoia, this elevation of heart rate, all of the thoughts starting to fractal out into all of the places that the mind can go? What do you do to ground people, center them, and get them through the ordeal?
First thing is always the breath, right? If we are low and slow in our breathing, we're low and slow in our nervous system. And one of the things with cannabis is that it produces a sympathetic nervous system response on onset. So that's why people can experience tachycardia, raised heart rate, etc. That's a feature, not a bug. It's just part of the equation. I think the issue is that a lot of people are very upregulated. And so cannabis can kind of play the straw that broke the camel's back, where they start to like, oh my God, I'm so upregulated. And so the first thing I do is bring them back to the breath. If we're doing breathe with cannabis and we're doing some upregulated breathing and they start to go through something, I'll come over. And usually before a ceremony starts, I'll ask, hey, is everyone okay if I put a hand on you, if you're going through something? Yeah, okay, cool. So I'll put a hand on them, maybe on their calf, maybe on their wrist. And I'll just tell them, hey, just breathe in, breathe out. And start to slow down and start to really just center in and just only focus on the breath. And start to realize, and this hit really good in the first episode we did, so I'll say it again, the ultimate mantra I have found is I took a medicine and the medicine is working. Because what's happening in that moment, right, where she's listing all these things, the ego is terrified that it's going to die. And so it's trying to throw all the shitty stories out there so that you go, I'm never doing that again. Because then the ego feels like, I'm safe now. I don't have to worry about dying. So if we can connect back to an empowering story and realize, and this is what I say at the start of every Breathe with Cannabis workshop, I'll say, hey guys, remember, all of you right now, before we connected with cannabis, you all came here excited to kick ass and have a transformation. You all want a transformative experience. Don't be surprised if when it comes up, a part of you is like, I don't want this. You got to remember who you are in that moment. And remember, I took this medicine and I knew this was a potential. And if this is happening, this is exactly what's meant to be happening. And I can't prove that to anyone by a study or anything. It's something that we have to own in ourselves. That if we felt called to come to this medicine, we're in a safe container, we feel like we're around people that can handle what we're going through and can support us if something happens, then we're able to go that deep. And so I get them back to the breath first. I get them back into the low and slow breathing, which allows them to start to get that space back. And then after maybe a minute, maybe 3 minutes of that, I just tell them, remember, I took a medicine, the medicine is working. And then, I took a medicine and the medicine is working. And then you start to see them come back a little bit. And I'm like, all right, remember, you can stay at this breath anytime you need. This is exactly what you need right now. And we make sure they understand like, hey, this is exactly what's meant to be happening right now. This isn't a random error. Nothing went wrong. This is actually it going extremely right. And sometimes what I'll do, if I can tell someone is really going through something, especially with edibles, where like the point that they realize they've gone too far, it's like just setting in. They got like 4 hours ahead of them.
At minimum.
I'll have nano-encapsulated CBD on hand and black pepper kernels. So this is a great practical tip for anyone to take away from this episode. If you get too high, these are the two things, along with low and slow breathing, that will bring you back down. Nano-encapsulated CBD acts as a antithesis to delta-9 THC. It literally just kills the intoxicating effects of it. And we've had this happen in Breathe with Cannabis workshops before. It's so funny. I'll tell everyone before we smoke, hey, I recommend going 70% of your normal rate. You can always do more. It's pretty hard to subtract once you're already there. We can do it with CBD and whatnot, but it's better than I have to. Just listen to your body and don't go too deep because there's a Goldilocks zone to this, right? You don't want to get blazoed. That's not what this is about. It's about just opening the door enough that you start to get these different perspectives, but you can still understand and like integrate on the go. And so there'll always be at least one person that almost immediately, we're not even done with the smokes session yet, which is like 10 minutes in the middle of the workshop. They come up, I took too much. And I'm like, all right, it happens. Okay. So I'll have them chew on a black pepper kernel, which has beta caryophyllene, also works as a antithesis to the intoxicating effects of delta-9 THC. And then I'll squirt them with about 200 milligrams of CBD. And those two things with low and slow breathing and that mantra, people come out of that and they're like, dude, I totally wrapped my mind back around it and I owned that experience. Like the part of me that I was looking to access, the infinite part of me, the part of me that's so wise, the part of me that knows all of this is just happening for me, that part got to lead the way again. And that's really what we're doing. Like all of these modalities are really just to get that part back in the driver's seat. Because the ego can be a great co-pilot, but it's a terrible pilot, especially when you're working with plant medicine, it's just like a kick and screaming teenager. And so that's how I get people back into their seat of power when, not if, because it does happen, and that's built into the experience, the same way that if we're a weightlifter, we've been going to the gym for 10 plus years, we can still get there one day and it almost feels impossible. It's not that since we've been going 10 years, it gets easier. It might get simpler. Like we don't overthink it. We just show up, but it can still be really challenging, And so for anyone out there, and this is one of the issues, that I see with a lot of people that come into this type of work and be like, oh, I've been smoking every day for 10 plus years. It's like, yeah, but you've been tuning out. Tuning in is very different, And so those are a couple practical tips to bring people back when they start to go too far.
Yeah, totally. You're here with your partner, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel like the benefits are in your intimacy, both in conversation and the physical conversation of making love?
Oh, dude, this might be the best question you've asked me so far because I'm so excited to talk about this. If we think about the term intimacy, into me see, like I have to be able to see inside of myself to be able to then see inside of her. And she has to be able to see inside of her to be able to see inside of me. And so everything as within, so without, right? It starts as an inside job. And so for me, what cannabis does extremely well, and I'll give a very practical example of this. When I was in my early 20s, or even when Rachel and I first started dating, I was 26, she was 24. And so, we'd get into arguments and I would think I was so justified. I would be like, she's totally in the wrong. I'm so right. All these silly ego traps. What my mind would tell me, right? If this was getting later on in the night, right? Maybe we had a fight at work and I get home at the end of the day. There was a part of me that's like, don't smoke weed. Don't do it. Because it knew the second I did, I would start caving and be like, actually, like, even if there was an example, which there never was, where I was totally in the right, whatever the hell that even means, I would still realize I could have responded better. I've also been the person that's reacted. Like, who do I think I am? Like she has handled me when I've been at, challenging points. Who am I to be all high and mighty now, right? So cannabis naturally brings this, like, I want to level the playing field and kind of break bread with people. And I want to see into myself. It just naturally brings that up for me. Even before I was ever into conscious use, before I ever knew that was a concept, I knew that if I was in an argument with someone, the last thing I wanted to do was smoke weed. I drink coffee, I do whatever, because that will strengthen, like, I want to get bigger, I want to be louder. So for me, what cannabis does is it's the ultimate way for me to see inside myself and to start to own a lot of the aspects of me that are both in my shadow and my golden shadow. I might have told this on the first podcast, but like there were years, man, that I watched your show from my bedroom And I was like, man, dude, like I was just so captivated. I mean, I always have been. You've been a huge inspiration for me, like a lot of my life. Yeah. And I really respect you for doing what you've been doing so long and, you know, being so out there and just like really owning who you are. And so I would watch it working at the dispensary. Like I'd be coming home and I would love it. But there was a part of me that was a little triggered inside. And I remember when I went to one of Paul's first workshops.
Wait, you mean there's people who watch my show and get triggered?
Just a couple, like one or two maybe, you know?
I mean, that's news. That's news to me, bro.
But it wasn't even anything you said. Like it was just what it really was. And I figured this out through Paul's support, was that it was the fact that I was telling myself a lot of shitty stories about why I couldn't go out there. Oh, I don't want to have a podcast. Like, no, I just don't want. No, I was just fucking scared, man. I was scared of what people would say about me. I was scared about what I would think about myself. If people said, oh, that guy's dumb or he sounds stupid or whatever. And so I stopped myself from a lot of the magic that I could have otherwise tuned into. And when I saw people like you that were owning who they were, it was awesome and inspiring, but also it like triggered me a little bit. And so again, like a lot of that stuff is what comes out too when you start to look into like shadow. Like shadow work is typically seen as like, oh, it's kind of icky. And we all know it's awesome. Like the benefits are awesome, but it's kind of seen as like, oh, the shadow. But a lot of your greatest divinity lives in there as well. And so for me, when it comes to Rachel, every single time that we get into an argument or something like that, I'll give it about maybe an hour, right? I'll settle my own nervous system. And then at a time where I feel like, okay, we can come back together now because she's much better at this than I am. When we get into an argument, I keep thinking, no, we can figure this out. Like, and she'll be like, we need to take some space and just like walk away for a little while. I'm like, no, we're like this close. And anyway, I just make it worse. So she's been a big teacher for me in that way. And so we'll go take some space. We'll level. And then I'll go to her and I'll be like, hey, I apologize. I see now how I was out of alignment with this or that or whatever it was. And she'll be like, yeah, I see how I could have responded differently or said this differently or whatever. And then I'll be like, let's go connect with the bag. And then we'll connect with some cannabis and we'll just go into this huge, like eye-opening experience where it's like, whoa. And then you want to talk about makeup sex? Dude, that is the best time because again, what just happened? Our walls completely came down. And so now I'm fully in my masculine. I can handle her feminine, right? And because I can handle her feminine, she can really express that feminine. And you better believe a woman can express that feminine and they feel safe enough to, it's awesome. It's really powerful. It's terrifying at times, but in the best of ways. You know, like if men like a couple things, it's novelty and penetration. And I think that's one of the main ways, right? That, you know, we keep novelty in a relationship is that,
sure.
You know, the feminine is pure potential and also it can be seen as chaotic, but I don't like that term for it. We know what it means, like chaos, like it can be fun, right?
Sure.
But it's not chaotic in a bad sense. I mean that in a very
mystery.
Positive. It's a mystery, exactly. It's mystery. And for me, what I've really figured out in life is the more mystery I have, the happier I am. The less I feel like I need to know anything. Like that's the biggest thirst trap all the time. We're never going to know anything. Everything here is subjective. So at the end of the day, when I can just relinquish into the mystery that is her, oh my God, the mystery comes back at me, you know? And so that's really what cannabis has done for our relationship and continues to do. I mean, we met in the cannabis industry when both of us were unconscious. We just loved the plant. And we've really come into this beautiful, beautiful type of ceremony with it where now when we go into these challenges and we come out of it and we connect with cannabis and we start to figure all this stuff out and we integrate in real time and then we have this really amazing intimacy after, we just become so much closer together. I mean, we've been together, 8 years now? Yeah, 8 years. November 22nd will be 8 years. And so I feel like at this point, I can tell her anything. And that is a feeling that I never knew I needed this much. But now that I have it, I can't imagine living without it. And I'm not going to say that cannabis did all that. We had to do work alongside it, but it was our teacher in learning. And it still is. Like we're eternal students in this, but it was our teacher. You know, it is our teacher. And it's such a great teacher for it.
That's beautiful, man. I think we should wrap up there.
Heck
Ryan,
yeah.
It's such a pleasure, man. I'm glad we got a chance to run this one back. The
Likewise,
first show was
dude.
great, and this one was equally as potent. So
yes.
I appreciate you for, championing this plan. And just for everybody out there, we're not saying go out there and do a bunch of cannabis and we're just giving a framework. It's your personal choice. Do what is best for you. We're talking about a lot of benefits, but if it's not for you, it's not for you. There's breath work, there's meditation, there's sensory deprivation tanks, there's ecstatic dance, there's just taking a hike out in nature, there's just contemplation. There's a million things that you can do to access the highest parts of who you are and actualize your potential in this world. So with all this being said, this can be a powerful teacher, but we're not here to recommend that you, whoever you are, John, Kathy, James, we're not saying that you should do it.
Yeah.
We're just saying that this is one of the great teachers that's available in our world, and it's part of God's bounty on this planet. And
You know,
there's no doubt about that.
one of the quotes that I love around this whole idea is that there are endless rivers that ultimately reach the same sea. The only one that's quote unquote wrong is the one that tells you there's only one way to get there. And so like you're saying, right? Like I'm not on here saying everyone should connect with cannabis. I'm actually saying you should discern a lot harder before you ever decide if you should connect with cannabis, because whatever experience you have is a result of you, not the plant. And when you choose to be an adult in this space, you can't just go around projecting anymore. And so, yeah, maybe cannabis is not your plant. Like for a lot of people, I really don't think it is. And I think that it takes a lot of discernment to figure out, you know, am I really tuning in, or am I just giving myself a silly story and really I'm tuning out and it's my ego's way of just numbing out? So yeah, 100% use discernment. It's the ultimate muscle to wield here. And like I said before too, like don't believe anything I say. Go research this stuff. Let me be a way shower, be skeptical, but learn to listen. You know, I think that ultimately is my favorite agreement for a reason, because it's all about discernment, baby. You know?
That's it.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen. Ryan, thank you, my brother. I appreciate you. Thank you, everybody.
Woof.
We love you. Goodbye. Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere. And leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.